Well, welcome back for our second week, and I hope you were able to get your reading done. Hope you read it well, carefully, and I hope you enjoyed it. I really like this particular part of Mark's Gospel because it's fairly action-packed. Mark's Gospel, in contrast to some of the other Gospels, moves very quickly, and he's going to cover a lot of ground very quickly. So one of the common themes that we see uniting the various little scenes in the second half of the first chapter is this idea of transformation and the power of Jesus' words and actions to change lives in very visible and very real ways. So for instance, we observe that Jesus is able to cast a demon out of a man who begins acting out in the middle of worship. We know that Jesus is able to heal Peter's mother-in-law from her illness so that she's able to rise and actually wait on them to provide service to them. And then in the last part of the chapter, we see that Jesus heals a leper of all things. So there's a lot of transformation going on right off the bat early on in Jesus' public ministry. And I think this is really important for us to pay attention to because it points to the idea that if Jesus has the power to transform those lives, He's got the power to transform our lives. And in the same way that Mark recorded these accounts, I'm recording this for you so that you will know my story and know that Christ has had the power to transform my life, and He continues to do that. And to demonstrate that, I want to invite you into a little bit of my own story. I shared some of that with you in last week's lesson with my experience with reading Scripture. But what I didn't tell you was that as I moved on through high school and graduated, I continued to read the Bible. I read a chapter in a gospel every night before I went to bed. And for my sophomore, junior, and senior years in high school, that was standard practice. I graduated from high school with distinction, with honors. In fact, I was sort of the golden boy of the high school. When it came to awards day, I was that kid that got all the awards. I went to college on a full-ride scholarship. I studied political science. That was really of interest to me. I was a pre-law student thinking that I would go on and do law school and become a practicing attorney. Right after graduating from college, I had the law school application right in front of me on my desk, and I just felt like I wasn't able to put the pencil to the paper, and I just wondered if maybe this wasn't the right time to go to law school, so I decided to do something different. I decided to pursue another dream, and that was a dream to fly military jets. Now, where that came from is not important, but this was a passion that I had had for years and years. So I made some phone calls and inquired about what would be involved in getting me in the cockpit of one of these jets that flew over our house in rural Indiana every day. And I came to find out that there was an Air National Guard unit in the area and they were taking applications. So I applied and they selected me to go to flight training. So I went to officer school. I was commissioned as a second lieutenant. In the last week of my officer commissioning school, I was awarded a distinguished graduate award. I was chosen as the final week's group commander, and I was asked to deliver our commissioning ceremony address. So again, I continued being sort of this golden boy. I went on to flight training in California and was number one in my class academically. I was number one in my flight in terms of our training simulator missions, and in terms of our actual flights airborne, I was the number one student who was absolutely guaranteed to get sick on the ride every time. And eventually the Air Force took a dim view of me getting sick in their airplanes, so they sent me home. And I came back from California in my mid-20s having failed for the first time in my life. And I had some serious conversations with God over this. I said, God, this isn't the plan. This is not the plan that I'm sure you had for me. The plan was that I would finish my flight training, I would come back home, I'd go to law school, I'd graduate, I'd get a job as an attorney, I'd enter politics, I'd become the youngest governor in Indiana's history, and I would fly jets on the weekends. This is a great plan. I can serve you well. You're messing this up, Lord. What's going on? And so for 2 years, I really struggled with what to do with my life and where I was headed. I tried a couple of business startups that failed miserably. At age 26, I was $50,000 in debt, mostly for unsecured money, living out of a bedroom in my parents' house. I said, Lord, what's going on with this? I just don't get it. And I happened to be dating a gal at that time for a short period who had suggested to me that maybe I would consider being a youth pastor. I said, I don't even know what that is. What's a youth pastor? I know what a pastor is, but having grown up in a real small rural church, I had no idea that there was any other kind of minister or pastor. So she explained it to me, and I said, well, that could be okay. I like working with youth. I like teaching Sunday school and working with our youth group. She said, well, I know of a job in Indianapolis that might be suitable for you. It's as a youth pastor, maybe you should apply. I asked her what the job paid. She told me, I said, I could never work for so little. She said, Brad, that amount is exactly that amount more than you're making right now. And I said to her, you've got a great point. So I applied for the job. And this great big church in Indianapolis hired me to be their youth director. I had no idea what I was doing. I don't even know why they hired me. But as I started my journey into that ministry, I realized that God really had something far better for me, far better for me. I remember now thinking back on one of my seminary classes taught by a fellow named Darrell Whiteman, who was teaching this missiology class about going into different cultures and taking the gospel there. And he said this. He said, friends, if God calls you to be a missionary, never stoop to be a king. And I thought about that, and I thought the Lord had called me to be a governor and a pilot. Maybe He's calling me to be a youth minister. Maybe I shouldn't stoop to do anything other than that. So for the next several years, that's exactly what I did. I had a long run as a youth pastor, and I loved every minute of it. Well, most every minute of it. Some of those lock-ins got a little late, and you know how that works. But I just knew that this was exactly where the Lord wanted me for that season of life. Now, you may be wondering why I'm airing my dirty laundry in front of you. There's actually a reason I've told you these stories. First of all, let me say clearly, I don't think there's anything wrong with being a governor or an attorney or a military pilot. I think these are important roles in our society, critical roles, in fact. But it was my desire to fill those roles that was problematic. It was all self-serving. It wasn't to please God or to glorify God, even though I, in my own mind, thought that it was. In reality, I was living on a path that was leading to a really unintended destination, and it wasn't healthy and it needed to be stopped. By God's grace, it was stopped. So as we come back to our text for today, we see that the man acting out in worship in Capernaum as Jesus was preaching was living a path of life that wasn't really intended for him. We know that Peter's mother-in-law was never intended by design to be sick when Jesus, the Son of God, comes to her house. Jesus fixes that through His grace. And we certainly know that that leper was never designed by God to be leprous and alienated and really shunned by the rest of his society. It was God's grace that intervened through the person of Jesus and redirected his life. And in the same way, God can redirect our lives.